Normally, capitalists will want growth and will seek growth. And if in a country you see that there is negative growth, so that if there is degrowth, what will happen? Immediately you will see investment will move to another country, to another region. It's very interesting the case of Japan. Japan has almost what you would say zero growth during the past decade. But investment, Japanese investments outside Japan, they are everywhere. In India and Thailand and that. So they are moving from Japan to other parts of the world.
I think they have some very large forest cover in Japan which is protected. But they invest in the deforestation and borders.
Yeah, and they invest. So at national level, if there is no more economic growth, what capitalism does is it moves to another region. What happens if the world economy doesn't grow? That is another question, because you don't have another planet to say, okay, now we're not going to invest in the earth, we're going to move to the moon. That you can't. So that question is very interesting, because we are reaching that point.
Yeah, but you haven't seen the films that he's been seeing, because there is a film in which I'm sure they go from here to invest in another planet.
Oh, well,
that's Avatar.
yeah.
Avatar, right?
Yeah. But that's the moment we are able to go to another planet, I'm sure capitalism will do that. But while we are not able to do that, then what we're seeing now is that every year grow. Now, before we used to grow at around 5 to 6% globally. Now the economy is growing between 2 to 3% per year. And if you read the IMF, the World Bank, all of them are saying, let's prepare, because this decade we are going to slow down even more. So in reality, when governments say we're going to grow at 6%, 7%, maybe some of them are going to be able to do it at national level. But if you take it at global scale, it will be something between 2 and even less. This is the problem. So capitalists are discussing what to do. And the problem that they are facing is that natural resources are not increasing. So what they have to do is create new markets where they can invest. So, and where can you create markets where you can invest money, you can make money without producing more, without needing to use more natural resources in a speculative market? So that is why in the last 15 years, we have seen that when we say the GDP grows, we have to look in very detail what part of the GDP is growing. And in many of the cases, what is growing is the financial part of the GDP. And it's more because of speculative issues. And then you have to take into account that there is all the destruction of the environment, of nature, that is not taken into account. So in reality, is there economic growth, or we are just facing the destructive forces of capitalism and not the productive forces of capitalism? Is there a moment where the destructive forces of capitalism are going to be more than the productive forces? I think that we are reaching that point, because capitalism has the two forces, the productive forces, but the destructive forces. So this is not an easy question to answer. In relation to energy, I fully agree with Sunya. has a problem. So if you apply solar energy to everywhere in big scale, you have a problem. Wind energy at big scale in Mexico is causing a huge problem because it's being used as a problem.
No, but then
to
we're
land
comparing,
power.
no, sorry for my interrupting. But obviously, I'd be for social and political change, for curbing luxury emissions, etc. Okay? Have cities like, why should Delhi get 24 hours of Bijli in many places? Right? We go a few kilometers outside Delhi and it's like 12 hours of Bijli, right? So why should Delhi, etc. That I would support politics, I would be for it. But if we talk about energy choices, and the choices between solar and coal, because otherwise, yeah, I do realize that grazing lands and villages are getting damaged in Rajasthan and places. Obviously, one would be against that. Yeah, but what are we weighing? We are weighing solar against nuclear, solar against coal, solar against crude. And if it does not come from Indian crude, if we're importing crude from places elsewhere or gas or whatever, all of which are damaging. So we're comparing damages, and we need to make that comparison. I think, you know.
But isn't it just? I mean, everybody not to be back and is that the key really is going for renewables, but in a decentralized manner. That's the real key.
No, but is that actually
to some
possible?
extent,
In the sense,
See, there is
it's happened in Germany to a degree in terms of household
it has not
rooftop
only happened in Germany.
photovoltaic.
Local grids.
Yeah.
Local grids which have surplus like said here. So you can do it at a village level, not just rooftops, on a local level. But I think you have some
I
ideas
think
about
it's
it.
not only happened in Germany, because in Germany it has happened in a larger scale and it's more publicized. But Germany being the strongest economy in Europe, you can say they have subsidized and they can. But it has also started happening in neighboring LDC, Bangladesh. In the last 6 years, there are 46 lakhs, lakhs is 100,000, distributed solar systems which have been installed. And we have not done, in India has not done. India is a far, far bigger economy than Bangladesh. Bangladesh is an LDC, and one of the lowest income LDCs. And it's happening there. So it's not that it cannot happen, but if it happens in the same capitalist model, then this is not desirable. What we are talking about, there are solutions, this can give solutions, but the model of implementation also has to change. The control of energy has to change.
So here, the renewable energy choices per se perhaps are not the problem.
No.
The problem is the centralized manner in which the decisions are taken, completely keeping the people out.
But there is
Perhaps
another
that's the-
critical aspect, which is none of the climate solution, of course the movements talk about this, none of the climate negotiations talk about or point out the consumption levels. Because if we continue to, like if the US continues to consume 13,600 kilowatt hours per person per year, that is the level they are consuming today. India consumes around 780 average. So then entire US system, if you want to convert to solar and wind, there will be massive destruction. So along with the distributed reasonable low damage areas, you also have to consider what kind of consumption level is sustainable. Not all consumption level are sustainable. In fact, there was a reasonably good, I will not say, of course none of these are ideal, but this JDR framework in the address to climate change, the greenhouse development right, they also connected that income is directly connected with your consumption of energy and materials is also energy. So the income is a very critical aspect. If your income keeps on rising and if there is no control on income, then it is very difficult to keep control on energy consumption and emission also.
What's the total generation? I don't mind if I.
Yeah, just one second, I think we take.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
If you could reflect, you have been based in Bangkok now and focus on Global South. So not the Latin America, which we used to call Latin America once upon a time.
South America.
Yeah.
South and
Not on that, but on this part of the world, the way we are still planning bullet trains and urban renewal means, demolishing all the traditional huts which were cool in summer and warmer in winter. So World Bank has given us money and the Japanese and US people have given us their construction firms, and so we have to do the government purchases from those multinationals. All that is all set, and that is going totally undisturbed. There is a global consensus, as you said, about global capitalism. So, I'm wondering, what is this scenario? It looks very frightening. If I just to communicate, I don't mean literally, but if you are a proper Marxist and not a corrupted Marxist, the last quarter of your presentation on alternatives is not from a Marxist viewpoint. It's a corruption of that pure thought of Marxism and Marxist practice as we have known on this planet. If we forget that part, which you are saying is very complicated, which you are saying is not very clear, and which you are saying also, you implied to say, can be reimagined only with the participation of the community at local levels also. Without that, alternative imagination will not come into being, and you today, can we call it left or not left? Suppose we exorcise that part, then the only option, political option we have is Pol Pot. If there is a choice between survival of 95% of people and 5% of people, then why go for killing 95%, and why not kill 5% straightforward? So that's my question as a Marxist.
You know that there are also some studies that say that what we are going to face because of this situation is more very deep authoritarian societies. So the possibility that you will have that is
but bloodbath will precede that authoritarianism.
I don't want to speculate, but that is a possibility.
But you're talking about authoritarians by the 5% over the 25%.
No.
I cannot.
You cannot say that.
We cannot say, but that you are going to have in some countries where you begin to have a lot of conflict because of the access of natural resources, authoritarian regimes, yes, and that those authoritarian regimes will be from 5% against 95%, yes. But it's also possible that we will have authoritarian regimes like the authoritarian regime of Pablo, in the name of the left. So I'm really against that. Absolutely. Pablo, when you know what I have learned here in Asia? I could never imagine what was Pablo.
Before coming to this part.
No, really. For me, it was one of the most surprising things. Because I could never imagine that somebody in the name of the left, and when I told you, if you want to call it left or not, because I have learned here that the left has done some tragic things, that, for example, in some meetings of peasant organizations, the Latin Americans come and say, we want to have socialism. And I hear here in Asia some peasant organizations that say, we don't want to use the word socialist. Because look what happened to us in socialism. In reality, they are not against the substance, but their experience, their concrete experience, is terrible. So I began to be more humble and to say, okay, if you don't want to use the word, yeah, there are histories and very deep, but the key issue is, what are we speaking about? What is the substance of the proposal? And there I see that we can all agree more easily, even if they are from Asia with this tragic experience and from Latin America. That is why I prefer, I am from the left, I am Marxist, but I think the most important thing is not the label, it's the substance. And this is the key. what are we speaking? A society, an alternative society that has to be more democratic for sure, because now in the capitalist system, who decides who's going to eat or who's going to die? The market. But in a socialist society, you want to use the word socialist, it has to be the society. But how the society is going to decide if there is no real, effective democracy? So I think that the greatest problem of us, the left, is that we have not been able to show to the world a democracy that is more rich, except in short periods of time of revolution. I think that the democracy that we saw in the Soviet Union during the 70s until the 21st was very big, but then it began to change. So democracies that really were very rich and vigorous.
1917 to 1919.
1917,
To 1919.
1919, 1920,
Yeah.
well, but that period of time, very rich. But after that, so, and I think that is one problem. And that is one key problem. Just one thing on what Sumya was saying. I fully agree. It is a combination. The alternatives are not only of what kind of energy. Of course, if you want to choose between fossil fuel and solar, it's not only to choose renewable. It's also to choose levels of consumption, how and which logic they are going to be implemented, and how the energy consumption is going to be redistributed between the whole society. Because even if you have a limit, and that limit is only used by 10% of the society, and the rest is with limits of underconsumption, then again we have the problem. Now, I think that in a climate negotiation, even if we are not able to have an agreement on that, we should have a proposal on that. I think that for Paris and for Peru, we can come with a proposal from different social movements that say, hey, what we want is to have a clear limit when it comes to energy. What you said, it's impossible to think with solar, whatever, if we are going to have a level of consumption of the US. It's not possible.
It's not 6 lakh, 46 lakhs.
So we have to have those kind of concrete proposals to bring the discussion in a more broad way and in a more concrete way.
Thank you very much, Pablo. We're going to have tea and some snacks, I think, also there, some tea.
Tea is there.
Tea is there, and we can perhaps carry on the discussion. I'll just take advantage of my being the chair to just say a couple of things. I think that you emphasize, 4 things struck me. One, of course, the importance of a new economic appropriation, the question of socialization of resources. Not nationalization, but socialization here. The second, your emphasis on the whole question of new relationship with nature. So you assessing that here. Whether the rights of nature is the right way of doing it is a tricky thing. But the essential point about sensitivity with regard to the question of nature. Here I can't help saying that Marxists have been different from Marx. Marx was always a lot more sensitive on this question about the relationship between humans and nature. His emphasis on the term metabolism. But the Marxist tradition, in most of the cases, has also gone in the wrong direction where Marx himself was more sensitive. So there is our resources there. The third point that you made, of course, is the whole question of the new social being. And here I think the point that Che stressed, and so many others also stressed, is that to create a new socialist society has to go in tandem with creating a new socialist man or woman. And therefore the whole question of changing oneself, the model that comes in. And of course the whole question of new and deeper democracy of a time which is much more superior. And lastly, the question of the market. There are 3 claims that are made for the market, and which in the dominant common sense, which are all wrong. One, that it is highly efficient. Second, that it is a source of freedom. And third, that it is just. in the sense that people get a just contribution here. I'll just say two of the things. Justice, of course, doesn't rhyme. Within the economics literature, there's a devastating critique of conventional economics which destroys the argument that profits are returned to capital. That was actually done in the 1960s. And nobody has been able to address, no matter there's the Nobel Prize winners or not, nobody has been able to address that critique. But they just ignored it, because that's what. On the question of freedom, certain aspects, because of the separation of the economic and political, you can have political and civic equality, but economic and social inequality is a must, and which sustains itself. And the notion of freedom that is peddled by the bourgeoisie is at the heart of this concept of freedom is the question of choice, of freedom of choice. But they avoid what is very, very important when they emphasize the question of choice, and that is that they don't look at the conditions of choice. For example, according to conventional economics, if you are unemployed, it's because you have a preference for leisure. The conditions which force you to be unemployed, or if you're not spending enough money on food or whatever, or on education for your children, well, it's your choice, rather than the conditions. And the second is they don't look at the content of choice. 1,000 different brands of toothpaste, or in most countries, between the Republican and the Democratic Party, between the Congress and the BJP. So even as they emphasize choice, they don't emphasize that, the question of content and the conditions of choice. Because that would mean going beyond economics to look at, of course, much larger context. The last thing about inefficiencies, there are actually 6 fundamental inefficiencies. One of them of great relevance with regard to what you were saying is 6 fundamental inefficiencies of the market system or a capitalist system. One, which is called public goods. Second, which is negative externalities. Third, which is very, very important, which I would like to stress here because it did come out. There is no way that capitalism can address the question of resource depletion in any sensitive manner. They can't do it by pricing. The central argument is that if you price it high enough, you'll reduce demand. That's it. The reason for this is that there is always an underpricing of all natural resources in capitalism because the time horizon is so short. If you did a proper pricing of fossil fuels, you would have to look generations ahead and see what the implications of depletion are. But the time horizon of all capitalism is always short. You can make it a little bit longer, but you cannot make it long enough. Which means that there will always be underpricing, even as they talk about the pricing being high enough to reduce demand. I think it's a very important point. Of course, the other inequalities are inefficiencies, inequalities, contract system, and lastly, this whole question of intellectual property rights. Nobody, as far as I know, has done a serious study about the counterbalancing effects. Their argument is that we can only increase knowledge by giving incentives through patents. But if you don't have patents, like you had through most of history, then knowledge spreads much more easily. If it spreads much more easily, doesn't that actually enhance the accumulation of knowledge and new ideas and new research more than if you have a restriction? At least do some kind of a balancement in the trade-off. It's never done. It's simply assumed that by giving incentives, you make it. So intellectual property rights is another form of inefficiency. The most central questions are 2, I think. One, of course, is that how do we convince enough people that this is the way forward? And the second one, which is more difficult, is that even after convincing, how do we bring about the strategic question we have? Anyway, thank you very much, all of you, for coming. We really enjoyed your presentation, Pablo. We wish that you will be here on some other occasions. When are you coming next year?
Can I propose on your behalf next dates? 13th, 14th, 15th May will be very interesting period. 12th May we have the last 9th phase of election, and 16th May we have the election results. So between those 3 days, if we could have a conversation on...
I'm sure you're only going to want to discuss about the future.
No, we can discuss about new imagination of community, whatever you have implications of your talk. Maybe, I could suggest a couple of topics just now on the...
Yeah, let's have tea now.
Let's have tea.
Think of these days.
And let's give Vijayji a machine gun. You want